technology. So I'd like you all to welcome Anne Marie Finn, and I hope she starts off by pronouncing what I'm trying to pronounce correctly. Okay, Anne Marie, can you come and join me? Let's look for her. Where is Anne Marie? There she
Hi,
is.
Brenda. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so sorry I butchered that word again.
That's the cystectomy. Cystectomy. It's hard to say.
Oh no, like vasectomy. It's cystectomy. Why did
No,
I do that?
I didn't have the first one. I had the cystectomy.
Well, good. Well, take it away, Anne Marie. Tell everybody about you. You're an amazing woman. You had a
Oh,
great story in the Phoenix magazine. So if you have an old issue of the Phoenix magazine, check it out with pictures. So go
oh.
for it. We're
Well,
looking forward to it.
thank you so much, Brenda. It's so good to be here. Thank you so much, UOAA and 11 Health for having me and for allowing me to tell my story. So as Brenda said, I am a teacher. And at Mashpee Middle High School, I'm on beautiful Cape Cod, Massachusetts. If you ever get a chance to come, I highly recommend it. I am a wife. I'm a mom. I have 3 beautiful adult children. I know that there are some. I get to show some pictures. So I'm a mom, and so that's my family, my 3 children, and I'm also a grandmother. I like to show the picture of my grandson and talk about him a little bit. He was actually, the week I found out I had cancer, I found out that my son and daughter-in-law were expecting. And he was actually born at the same hospital where I had my surgery. So it's kind of a special connection. So I am a teacher at high school. And when I first was diagnosed, I had been teaching special education for about 15 years at Mashpee and had just moved over to teach English. So it was my first year of having my English classes. So it was I was teaching 12th grade English at the time and had some symptoms, went to the doctor at that point and was diagnosed with a UTI and told to follow up with my doctor, follow up with my gynecologist. And it was my gynecologist who found the mass. So for a lot of women, and I know this is about ostomies, but I know for a lot of women with bladder cancer, that's often the case. So you're looking at other things. They were thinking about chemo. They thought that I would need chemo, that it had spread, but fortunately it had not. So the pathology was verified and it was stage 1. It was stage 1, but it was high grade. So I did do immunotherapy. It's called BCG. And that was from about October through November. And I had some more surgery to see if it worked or not in December. And at the time we found out that cancer had come back. So really, because the cancer was so aggressive, my best chance for living was a radical cystectomy, which would be a urostomy or a neobladder for me. I did not qualify for a neobladder because of where the tumor was. So we did decide that I needed a radical cystectomy. So on January 25th, to be exact, on 2019, I did have a radical cystectomy. And that's kind of where my story for UOAA begins. So tonight is really about, we're calling it the ABCs of ostomies. And as a teacher, I wanted to talk about my ability to get back to work and maybe some things that will help people along the way. So because of my cancer diagnosis, and because the cancer diagnosis came in the summer, I went into the school year knowing that I had this in front of me. One of the things that really, really worked for me was being open with my administration. As a teacher, and pretty much everybody here has been to school, I have a principal who is my immediate supervisor, and we have a superintendent. So really, it was, for me, I wanted to be open right from the start and let people know what was going on. And they were very, very supportive. So it was, I'm sorry, I just got to look at my notes a little bit. So I informed them that it was, that I was going to be going through treatment. And so we had to come up with a plan right from the start. Because I'm a teacher, I needed to get my substitute ready because I was going to be out for several months and I would have a substitute teacher. So I was going to be training the substitute. Fortunately for the immunotherapy, I did not need to have to come out. If I had been on chemotherapy, I would have been out for a long time, but I did not need it. So I was still in school, and I was still going to school while I was going through treatment. But then when we found out that I needed to have the surgery, that was a whole nother conversation that I had to have with my principal. I will say that it was kind of it was difficult. I went in just right after the Christmas break and told him that the treatment hadn't worked, and so I would need the surgery. And so that was pretty devastating for people. Again, I was a 12th grade English teacher. Unfortunately, the next day, the 12th grade math teacher died unexpectedly. He was a young guy, and it was really, really devastating for the students. It was such a hard year. So for me, it was really important through all of this that I do the best I could to get back before the end of the school year. So I really worked hard to do that. So the surgery was scheduled for January. So a couple things I'd like to, that worked for me in getting ready for the surgery, where there were a couple of organizations that were really helpful, a couple of things that I did that helped me get ready for the surgery. One was, as Brenda put at the beginning, I am a volunteer with the Beacon, which is Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network. If you are facing a radical cystectomy due to bladder cancer or anything else with the bladder, please, it's a wonderful organization. My oncology urologist actually told me about it at my first appointment, and they just had a wealth of information. They had people that you could talk to. They have a survivor program. They had a sheet where there was all kinds of recommendations for things that you could do with equipment that you could keep that would be helpful when you got home. They gave suggestions. Talking to the survivor volunteer that I spoke to just really helped me start to wrap my brain around it. There was at the hospital where I was at, they had a pre-surgery course. And what they did was they talked about pre-surgery, during the surgery, and post-surgery, things that you could expect. That was the first time I actually got to handle equipment and things and look at that. And they talked about how to put it on, take it off, things to expect. And that was very, very helpful for me. And also the other thing I highly recommend, if possible, is to get an ostomy nurse. I was fortunate when I came home from the hospital, I did have an ostomy nurse, and she was so helpful in helping me learn how to put on my device and also dealing with the skin issues that I had, also working at my hospital with the ostomy team. So they really all helped me, and it's a team, and that was really important for me to be able to be in a place mentally so I could move on. Teaching is a little bit different. I think the education field's a little bit different than a lot of people in that we have very specific contract that we negotiate every 3 years. They talk about your sick bank, exactly what's expected of you, what you have, what you're able to do as far as leave and things like that. They also, every year, we actually, at the beginning of every school year, we go through many trainings, and those things have to do with your rights as far as disability rights and things like that. So that's something that we're very cognizant of in the industry of education. We definitely, we're aware of that, especially as a special education teacher. You know that students have disabilities and students have rights. And I don't know if we'll be talking about that later. I know that UOAA, I know we're planning on talking about disability rights at a future broadcast, but it's, as an adult, I also have rights. You, as an ostomate, also have rights. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So one of the first things that I had to do was that I had to provide paperwork for the HR department, and it's FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, which allows people, you are entitled to up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for taking care of family members, but also for serious illness. So you do have that right. I did have to provide documentation from my doctor, which I did right because I was going through the cancer treatment. I did fairly early on in the process. So there was an expectation that I would have that would be taken care of. There's also a couple of other protections that you have as an ostomate. The ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is an important one. I don't feel disabled. I have a prosthetic bladder. I don't feel disabled. However, in the eyes of the law, I do have a disability in that it does interfere with I'm sorry, I'm looking for the word here. Can't find it. All right. So just a daily activity. It interferes with a daily activity. So it is considered a disability. So you do have rights based on the law in all areas of public life, including your employment. There's also the Rehab Act of 1973 and me as a teacher, because we do receive federal money, we are mandated to obey that particular law, the Rehab Act of 1973. And so that does protect also people from discrimination. So there are definitely some things that you have behind you. So when I was talking with my principal and the superintendent, they were fully aware of these laws as well. And we were able to come up with a plan. So as far as I got my time off that I needed, but also when I came back, it was important that I spoke to them about having a plan. For me, it's about having access to the bathroom in case I need it. So I not only worked with my principal as far as the schedule and things like that, so I do have access, but in case I need to go for an emergency, or if for some reason I have a leak and I need to take care of it, I have a plan with my administration as well as the other teachers around me so that I can leave and take care of that situation if I need to. I did work right up until the day before my surgery. I like my job. I have, teaching is one of the best jobs in the world. And if I could share one story with you that I think is just before I went into my surgery, the day before, I walked into school and everyone was wearing a button and it says, "No one fights alone." And so for me, the support that I had from my administration and my peers, it was just so emotionally overwhelming. But I think that's because I shared what I was going through. There was cancer, but then it was beyond the cancer. It was about this surgery, this life-changing surgery, and they wanted me to know that I had their support. So I think for me, by sharing, and not everyone's willing to do that or able to do that, and that's okay. I think one message I want to get across is it's whatever works for you. That worked for me. So that was No One Fights Alone. So, and that's the button right there. And that's a lot of my peers after my send off that afternoon. I mean, I literally was going for surgery the next day. So it was really pretty special. And I do work in a wonderful place. So my surgery it was 7 hours. It was 7 hours. What Brigham and Women's does is that they do have its enhanced recovery after surgery program, which they get you walking as soon as possible. They feed you as soon as possible. Getting up the next day and walking was hard, but every time I walked further and further. I had some complications. I needed transfusion and iron and things like that, but it didn't matter. I kept walking and I was building up my strength so that I would be able to go back to work. It was 8 weeks, the doctor said I would be able to go back to work. About 8 weeks is about how long it took me to feel well enough to go back. I did take a couple more weeks only because we just did it based on the term. So it took me a little while. It took a little extra time to go back. I was happy to have that time to go back. I did go back full time right away. I do not have a job that entails heavy lifting. That might be different for some of you going back to work. So going back to work, if you have a job that entails heavy lifting and things like that, you would probably have to talk to your doctor and you might need to make more changes than I had to make. Again, I'm talking about my experience as a teacher. So just a couple of things to just kind of help plan for going back to work. And the first thing is to have a plan. Definitely I had a plan for going back to work. I had a plan in case I had a leak. I keep a change of clothes at school, and I keep extra of the equipment that I need, the bags, the wipes that I use to clean it off. Those things, I keep those at school. You don't want to keep them in your car just because the sun and the heat is not really good for it. But I do keep it at school. So if I do need to change, I am able to do that. Again, it takes about 10 or 15 minutes. So I have that planned with my peers. Also, this summer, I actually did get sick. I did, when you have a urostomy, you could possibly have more UTIs, which I did, and it went septic. So I was really sick, and I got sick right away. So the other thing that I learned is that to have a plan. So as a teacher, I want to have a substitute plan, emergency plans ready to go. So if you have emergency plans in place for your job, be it for whatever it is. So if you do get sick and you have to leave, to have something in place, I think is really smart. I was afraid to go back. I was kind of, I know this came from my daughter, but it's a great visual. I did have this vision of The Shining with the elevators opening up and urine washing out everywhere while I'm standing in front of my class. I saw Mean Girls, it was intimidating for me as well, but that's never happened. I had one leak, and it's kind of like, oh, darn, I'm leaking, but it wasn't a big deal. Nobody knew. The kids and the teachers, the kids are very, very kind. I'm pretty open with students as well as my peers. They are very kind. They're really, really good kids. I love the kids that I work with. So a couple things also, UOAA has some great resources for you to look at. They have an Ostomy Incontinent Diversion Bill of Rights. That is not law, but it is certainly something that they believe strongly that everyone has a right to do. They have this, it's showing now, back to work with an ostomy. So just, they give you just everything from being prepared to knowing your rights, is being able to dispose of your bag properly, staying hydrated. I drink a lot of water. I bring my water with me. So they have some really good resources. They also have workplace resources for employment-based discrimination. Again, you do have rights. And I do know that we are planning on offering some more information for disability rights in the future. So just, I have a couple minutes here, so I'll just about 2 minutes or so. But I just wanted to say that the reality, as Brenda said, was so much better than I expected it to be. When somebody said this is the new normal, and I hate the term new normal, but it's normal, but it's fine. I really don't think about it. When I wear the same clothes I wore. I dress professionally. I'm able to go all day. The pictures that they're showing up there right now is literally right after I came. That was just from April through June of when I went back to school, being in class, participating in the different activities we did in school. To graduation, I chaperoned prom, and I looked really nice, by the way. And my daughter and I we chaperoned a field trip, actually to Boston. The Boston Pops played they played the Star Wars movie, and they played all the music. It was the coolest thing ever. But I was able to travel from Cape Cod to Boston to go to the symphony, to do all of those things. I've participated fully. And it was just, it takes some planning, but, and it will be fine, and you will be able to go back to work, and, you will be able to live a very fulfilling life. I know that I do. And again, I have the best job in the world, and I've been able to continue it, and I plan on teaching for several more years. So I do thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Reach out, and thank you so much.
Wow, that was fantastic, Anne-Marie. And I wrote down a few of your quotes. No one fights alone. That was a great story to hear about your coworkers supporting you like that. I love that. And then I would want to be one of your students because you said at least 3 times teaching is the best job in the world. And it probably really comes across in front of your students. And I thought some of your real practical advice was have a plan, have a plan.
Yep.
And I think I particularly loved your image of the elevator opening up and then, whoo, there's all that, a wave of urine coming at you. That was your
It's never happened. It did not happen.
That was great. So one of the questions I think that came up is one that we often hear. I love the way, looking in the chat line, you have no idea right now because you've been so busy talking, but people from Colorado and Tennessee and Idaho and Brazil and South Africa and Cincinnati and Florida and Missouri,
Wow.
they're all online and they're giving advice to each other as you're talking. When someone asks a question, Liz Hiles is being really great with offering good things. And Sherry had a question about her husband has an ostomy and he has ileostomy, but she's wondering how she can best support her husband with his ostomy anxiety. Could you answer
Well,
that?
that's something I didn't mention. When I was receiving my treatment, I actually had shingles, and they attributed that to the stress of everything. So, and I did have a lot of anxiety, so they put me on some anti-anxiety medicine, and I did go to counseling. I did Psychology Today. Actually, Dana Farber actually told me Psychology Today has a physician finder that you could find somebody in your local area, and it was somebody who concentrated in cancer. So I did get counseling so I could talk about it because, again, I walk a lot. I walk with my dogs and my friends, but I just didn't always want to burden my family and friends with everything that I was going through. So, I kind of paid somebody to listen to me. It was kind of even, better than being married.
It's a smart thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. That's great.
But to be there to listen, and sometimes, my fears I know were sometimes unreasonable, but they were my fears and they were legitimate. And I think that we have to be able to talk. I know UOAA has a support group finder. So if that's something that to find a support group, or if that would probably be something that I would recommend as well.
Exactly. And also all the important things you said, UOAA has been putting in the chat line all the connections to the UOAA information where you can find all those resources. So if you don't have time because you're so engaged in what we're listening to, later on you can go back and look at this webinar on YouTube and Facebook, and you can probably look at some of the chat stuff going on and learn a little bit more that way too. Mm-hmm. So always take some time and explore the United Ostomy Association website because you'll find a lot of information there.
And don't be afraid to ask for help. It's there. There's so many more people out here than I ever realized. I never knew that it existed, and now there's this whole this world of wonderful people out here that will support you. So don't be afraid to reach out.
And I really liked hearing your description of the Family Leave Act too, because I've heard about that, but I've never known anyone that's actually used up to 12 weeks. That was 12 weeks you said, right?
Yeah, you're entitled to that. I had sick time already based on, again, teaching's a little bit different. I had sick time accumulated. We also have a sick bank. So if I had used all my time, we donate time. So people who get ill have time to use. So that's something, but talking to your HR, human resources, and or if you have a union, to talk to your union and see what's there I think is important.
That is great. Let me look quickly through some more comments. Let's see. We're a beautiful community of ostomates, Danielle wrote, and she's right.
Yeah.
And it is how we support one another. Even the chat lines is amazing to see when we don't have as much time as we'd like to have. I think one question I'll have, and I have a feeling that Dr. David will cover this, but what's the difference between what you have to do at night with a urostomy versus people with colostomies or ileostomies?
Well, for me, so we have I have a night bag. So kind of the Foley bag, you go to the hospital, you get the big Foley bag.
Yeah.
I use that every night. I have a little wastebasket and that I keep next to the bed, and gravity works. And so I don't have to get up during the night. I saw the last Avengers movie, and I think I was the only person in the theater who didn't have to get up and miss anything because I had my night bag and I just sat there and I was all set. But yeah, so some people do choose to set their alarms for every 2 hours and they'll get up and empty their bag. I use a night bag. Some people, there are jugs that you can use, you just don't have to get up during the night. It's actually one of the benefits of it, honestly.
Yes, that's what I've heard. And people say no, they don't have to wait in line at the sporting events.
Don't have to sit on those gross toilets anymore. Oh yeah, no, there are definitely some benefits.
There's always some advantage.
Yep.
Well, you helped us see it in a very positive manner, and just your example of being able to go back to work and having the support from your family really made this a special talk. And Anne-Marie, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Would you be willing to just wait till the end in case anybody has more specific questions?
I will be here. Absolutely.
That would be great. Okay. Then I think we're going to get ready for our next speaker. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And our next speaker, I have not had the pleasure of meeting him, but I've heard wonderful things about Dr. David Schwartzberg. He is a colorectal surgeon at Northwell Health who specializes in colorectal cancer and inflammatory bowel diseases. He serves on the executive council for Take Steps, the medical advisory committee for the Long Island's Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and is very active with patient education programs. After his residency in general surgery at NYU Langone and Bellevue, Dr. Schwartzberg completed a colorectal surgery fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, with further advanced training in complex Crohn's disease and redo J pouch surgery at the IBD Center at NYU Langone Health. He has written numerous peer-reviewed publications and book chapters and has presented nationally on surgical techniques for the treatment inflammatory bowel disease. He specializes in minimally invasive colorectal surgery, complicated Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis surgery, and performs ileal pouch, anal anastomosis, J pouch, and redo pouch surgery. So I want to welcome Dr. David, and as with Anne-Marie, please keep your questions coming in the chat line, and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. Welcome, Dr. David. I think he's coming on in this next second, I hope. Let's see. Anything I should know that he's not here yet? Oh, you love Dr. Schwartzberg. That's good to know, double bagging it. Okay, David. May not to stretch now. All right. Hey, guess he's not here just yet. So let me read a couple more of the chat line things if they're saying anything. I thought he was here. Here he is. He's coming.
Oh, there you go.
He likes to. I can see he's the type of person that likes to build up the suspense, right? And so he's coming on now.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh,
you
good.
have kind of a funny picture right now. You're not in
I have
the camera.
I am here, but I thought I could put the camera on myself and say hello and say how grateful I was to be here, and then quickly set this up. But I have a series of textbooks and a lamp that's bent over so the light so everyone can see what I'm going to draw.
Okay.
And it was just way too difficult. So I'm here though.
How about we just have a
want to do the
conversation?
old-fashioned way.
We can have a conversation with you. Everything's sideways that you're showing us. You realize that, right? It looks sideways.
So I can switch that.
Yes, switch it.
What if I go this way?
Now we can't see it because it's too far away. So we have to get that very close. Much closer.
See, on my phone, it looked okay.
No.
What about this? Can you read this?
ABCs of Sean.
Of stomas. Well,
there we go. Stomas. Okay.
I have doctor handwriting. Oh, I see. It does look a little far away. I'm sorry. Give me 2 seconds. In the meantime, I'm going to just
Are you sure we are doing a comedy show right now? Are you sure this is not a comedy show? You're looking so
I thought this was a comedy show.
Oh, yeah. Well, it could be.
And I'm here all weekend. Tip your waiters. What about that? Can you read that? That looks okay.
Yeah.
Although, should it be that way? Is that better? Is that better? Oh, man. I had everything lined up, and it looked excellent. I'm just going to turn it around, and I think we can go. How about that? Did I lose everyone? That looks pretty good. Am I here?
I think everybody else can see it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So I think this should be okay.
Alrighty.
So I'm going to do something that my good friend and I, Allison from Empowering Patients, kind of came up with, and that was to give people some education on stomas and why they're created and where they're created, and why they're created, where they're created. And in knowing that information, you can kind of understand why different types of stomas have different types of output, and why we worry about high output sometimes if someone has an ileostomy or a jejunostomy. But I'll explain all this stuff. And why someone can have prolapse, why someone can have a peristomal hernia, why it's so important to have an appropriate sized appliance, preventing leaks and things like that. So can you see I'm erasing this? It's funny, on my screen before it looked excellent. But anyway. Did I lose everyone? I'm not sure why.
Can you give them my sound too? Yes, we can see you and
You can.
everything's going great. People are writing funny things right now.
Yeah, if you know me, then you realize I'm not very good with technology.
Mary Beth said if we try hard, we can sometimes see his reflection in the board. So
I'm
they do
here.
want to see
I'm
your
here.
face.
I'm here. So I
Okay.
wanted to go over, and can you see me writing up here?
Yes. Yes, we
So I
can.
wanted to go over what a stoma is, right? So the Greek definition was either a rosebud or simply an opening. And so it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that all stomas, the lateral, the last part of it is just ostomy. And so based off where it is in the GI tract gives it its name. And here's the colon. So some people have, usually it's a feeding tube, but it can be in the stomach. And we call that a gastrostomy tube. Some people can have, and this happens in Crohn's disease when there's repeat resections, kind of moving down the GI tract. If they're using a piece of jejunum, it becomes a jejunostomy. If they're using a piece of terminal ileum, it can become an ileostomy. And it's all just the different parts of the body. If it's anywhere in the colon, it is a colostomy, still ostomy. The only caveat is we could do something that's called a mucous fistula. And some people may have kind of heard that term and wonder what that is. It's basically the same thing. The only difference is that in any one of these stomas, the food and the waste comes to, let's say there's an ileostomy bag and it fills that up. The difference between a mucous fistula is a lot of time that's after the stoma. And a lot of times people can have that made right here, where here is their colostomy. And the mucous fistula is an opening, but nothing goes through it. It's simply there to alleviate any back pressure, because sometimes we worry if there is a staple line that any kind of back pressure may cause a perforation, and we worry about sepsis. So sometimes, to be extra cautious, you do a mucous fistula, and that, although it can be cumbersome because there's a new opening that you have to pouch, it is life-saving because, again, it can prevent sepsis. So these are kind of all the different stomas. So it's not that complicated. It's just based off where it is. The other thing is some patients can have a urostomy. So the bladder is typically here. Some patients need it removed. So what they do is take the kidneys and they take the ureters, which normally go to the bladder, and instead they have to remove that bladder, and they take these ureters and they connect it to a piece of intestine, and that intestine it's brought to the skin, and that's how it drains the urine. And the other piece of intestine is then bypassed. So that's the whole based off, where the location is. So we're going to go over kind of how these are made, because how these are made vary in different people. In fact, ideally what we do is take the rectus muscle, which are the six-pack muscles that are in the middle of the abdomen, and you ideally want the stoma to be somewhere in that muscle. We have the pubic bone, we have the hip bone, and you have the belly button. And technically, if you draw a triangle, within that muscle is the optimal location for a stoma. And a lot of times it's on the right side and, underneath the belt line, but it has to be visible. And that's one of the biggest things that determines if we have to move the stoma or not. And a lot of times this is an ileostomy. And a lot of times on this side, it's a colostomy. But it varies. And based off the location, it might be for this reason. The person has to be able to see what's going on. So if they happen to have a little bit of a bigger belly, and ideally you're going to put this stoma down here because that's what the textbook says to do, they might not be able to see that. So in that situation, you move the stoma up. So all these little things need to be, trained into people. And then the surgeon, it's their job at that time to assess, well, I know the ideal location is here, but in this particular person with this body habitus, it's better to move it. So next thing, how we make these stomas. As I said, we like to go through what's called the rectus muscle. What we do when we make the stoma is move the muscle out of the way. We don't actually resect the muscle. And that's important because the muscle's pretty thick. If you look at it from the side, the muscle's like this. And then we make a little hole in the middle. And that's how we bring the intestine through. But see here, it can re-squeeze back in on the bowel. And that's why a lot of times we want people to be on low fiber, or we want them to watch what they're eating, because we feel that if the muscle happened to squeeze back together, and let's say you had a bunch of broccoli, it can kind of become trapped and can cause an obstruction. So one of the reasons people get an obstruction at the level kind of the skin or at the abdominal wall is because they can have a food impaction right here. And typically that resolves by itself. Sometimes we have to do a colonoscopy and kind of just get through. Sometimes people end up getting a CAT scan, but by simply drinking that contrast, it really kind of propels things through and then people feel better. But so that's one of the things, that you can get a blockage. And the reason you can get a blockage is because we make the stoma through the muscle. Now, muscle can kind of contract. Now, the good thing is when that muscle's contracted, it lessens the opportunity to have a prolapse. So stoma prolapse is another problem that we sometimes face. So if here's the skin, and here's the inside of the abdomen, and here's the muscle, what we do when we make the stoma is cut through this, but again, moving the muscle to either side. And here's the stoma, and it gets looped like this. The thing is, when we do this, we only really secure it circumferentially, but here and here. So what that means is the inside can move in and out. And unfortunately, it can move down. And if it moves down, it may be very close to the skin. And if it's very close to the skin, especially with an ileostomy, which is very liquidy, or a jejunostomy, which is very liquidy, because those are from the small intestine, it can be essentially flat. And then the problem is it becomes very difficult to pouch, because you try to pouch the stoma, and inevitably some liquid gets underneath and then starts causing irritation all around the skin. And then the appliance doesn't stick. The other problem is that it can go the opposite direction, and the stoma can be brooked this way, and this part can move out like folding a sock, because it's not attached. And so what happens is it can come out like this. And that's really not dangerous, assuming that the blood supply isn't cut off. So what you can do in that situation, it sounds a little crazy, is you can put sugar on the stoma and it gets some of the water out, and then it can be reduced. But it's something that if it continues to happen, sometimes you need additional surgery, and we can try to suture the bowel to the abdominal wall to prevent that from happening. But that's the reason why you have both retraction and prolapse. The other thing that's very common is that we bring the bowel through the abdominal wall like this. and we make, again, we just spread out the muscle. The problem is sometimes this bit of muscle that we've moved over can get larger and larger. And when it gets very large, we call that a parastomal hernia. And it's really just that the opening that was made to get the intestine through happens to become a little too big. And it can be big enough that it can cause pouching problems, or it can become big enough that other pieces of intestine can actually get stuck in there. And then it causes pain. It can cause blockages. So if that's something that's happening, then you see why. Essentially, every stoma on some level gets a little hernia, because you don't want to make this too small or it can squeeze the bowel. And even if you make it the right size, eventually it will get a little stretched out and you can develop a hernia. So there are ways to fix this. If it becomes symptomatic that the person can't pouch anymore, if it becomes symptomatic that there's other pieces of intestine stuck in there, what we can do is go to the operating room. And there's a few things. We can resuture it back nice and closed. We can put a piece of mesh underneath to help grab the intestine so it doesn't move, and we can fix the hernia. We don't like to do that a lot of times in Crohn's disease. Or you can technically close this up and pick a different spot that maybe won't have such an issue with prolapse. But again, it's something that happens. And if you see the anatomy, you can kind of understand why. So then if we're looking at different spots of the intestine, the further or the closer you get to the stomach, here's the stomach, the higher the output is going to be. So we do worry, even with an ileostomy in someone who's never had a resection, that because the colon isn't in circuit, because the colon's not going to see any of the food or the fluid or what we call the succus, meaning pre-stool. It really, our body only forms stool as it enters the colon. So before right here, it's all liquid. And we worry that sometimes the output can be too much. Maybe it's even over a liter or so. And this is definitely a plug for 11 Health, because they help monitor that. Because one of the biggest things when I discharge a patient with a new ileostomy is I want to make sure that they're staying hydrated and that their output is not too much, because I can always start them on Imodium and Lamodal. I can give IV hydration even at home a few times a week. But it's very important to monitor that output. And we like it to be around, a liter or less. We don't really want it to be over a liter. But the further you go back, let's say someone's had a resection for Crohn's disease, and then they had another resection, and then they have another resection, and now they have a jejunostomy. The body may adapt, but we really worry that this is even more liquidy, and we really can deal with high output. And that's when you start approaching short gut syndrome, unfortunately. And there are things to help the bowel become like a super water adapter and absorber. But sometimes it takes some time. When we start to get into the colon, we don't really worry about dehydration because we know it's stool. So the body had this entire area to absorb the water it needed. But over time, the body will adapt to any situation. So we have the different consistencies, we have the different locations. Another thing to talk about is why to brook a stoma to begin with. Now, a brooked stoma is different when it comes to the ileostomy and the jejunostomy. And what we mean by brooking it was Dr. Brian Brooks who came up with this, along with Rupert Turnbull, who was at the Cleveland Clinic. And his idea was to fold the stoma back on itself, and that prevented it from drying out. It's very important to get that stoma above the skin level, because then you can pouch it properly. So retraction is a big issue. It's different with a colostomy, because what's coming out is very solid. So even though we try to have the stoma brooked always, it really becomes an issue with an ileostomy and a jejunostomy. The other thing is the difference between a loop ileostomy and an end ileostomy. An end ileostomy, we can draw the difference here. If here is the abdominal wall, there's the muscle between it. If we're making our ileostomy, it's an end ileostomy. What we do is divide the two abdominal wall parts, move the muscle out of the way, and then there's one piece of intestine that comes up and is folded on itself. And it's got its blood supply here. That's an end ileostomy. Now, it can be reversed, but the other end could be somewhere else. And it's usually a big procedure to reverse it. For instance, this is the first stage in a J-pouch surgery, where you take the entire colon out and you leave an end ileostomy. Now, eventually, you have to take the rectum out and you make this small intestine into a J-pouch. And that's obviously a very big surgery. It's different with a loop ileostomy, because what we do in a similar fashion is open this up. But what we do is bring one piece of intestine like this, and it literally is looped and it's connected, and here's its blood supply. And then all we do is make a little cut here and fold it on itself. On the surface, a lot of the times, a loop ileostomy just looks like one hole. But in actuality, there is another little hole here that we tucked away. But the point is they're attached. So to reverse a loop ileostomy is very straightforward and much less complicated than doing an end ileostomy. So an end ileostomy has only one lumen, which is, one hole. And the loop ileostomy, although you may not see it, actually has two. And a lot of times we use loop ileostomies in someone who has maybe very complex Crohn's disease, and they have a lot of inflammation on their terminal ileum, and that's the end of the small intestine. There's the appendix, and it goes into the colon. But maybe there's another fistula here to the sigmoid colon. So maybe what needs to be done is this needs to be taken out, this needs to be resected, this has to be resected, this has to be resected. And we can put all of that back together, but it also scares us that things are very inflamed. And what if there's a leak that happens? So to let all these things rest, we rearrange everything. We connect this to that. This part goes to here. This part can be resected or repaired. But now there's a lot of connections. There's a connection here that had to be made. There's a connection here that had to be made. And to let that rest, sometimes what we do is do a loop ileostomy right here. And that's this. That's where two pieces are brought together. And then once this is healed, usually we do what's called a gastrograph and enema to make sure everything is open. Then to reverse it, we basically just cut this area and put these two ends back together. And what that ends up looking like is this. And then we just push it back inside. And there's some technique to it, but that's basically what we're doing. And then what we're left with is the intestine back together, just like this, inside the abdominal wall. And typically people spend 1 to 2 days in the hospital for that surgery, which is much different than an endoleostomy where things have to be redone and the two ends connected. So that explains, not too much, but I wanted to just give an idea of the difference between an endoleostomy versus a loop ileostomy, a jejunostomy versus a colostomy versus an ileostomy, and then explain why there can be a prolapse that can happen, why there can be a hernia, and why it can actually retract. And why, despite the ideal location, sometimes because of a previous scar, or again, body habitus, someone has kind of a big belly and they just, it's just not working, that putting it in the quote unquote ideal situation where here's the pubic bone and the hip bone and the belly button, and we learned about the stoma triangle where it should be like this, maybe this isn't the best spot. Maybe there's a scar here from a previous stoma and they have to move it to this side. And so when you wake up and there's a stoma maybe in a different location, those are kind of the reasons why. But if there's any time, I would be glad to draw or do anything I could to help just understand the anatomy a little, because it's all very foreign. And a lot of times patients are not explained what exactly went on or why things happen the way they did happen. And I'm a big believer that knowledge is power. And I try to do this with all of my patients to give them as much understanding as possible. And I know it's very traumatic to wake up with a stoma, even a planned one, and there's a lot going on. And that's why I think it's so important to have a stoma team and have care in the hospital. But also, once the patient gets home and they really starts to settle in, I'm supposed to take care of this. Do I have support? And that's what we try to do, at least, myself and my hospital. And that's why I love 11 Health, because they really are always there for the patients as well. And I truly, truly mean that, because I think knowledge is power, and having a support system is huge. And I know some people have a permanent stoma, some are reversible, but I personally love stomas because I've seen patients that are so very sick, and then they're able to have such a complex operation and have that operation safely because we can give them a stoma, and it gets their life back, and they're back to their family and their friends and back to their jobs and back to school. And so I fully embrace stomas. I'm there for my patients. I think they are lifesavers. I think stomas are life. And I think, thank God, as humans, we've come up with that. We've done so many things that have hurt so many people in this world, and we've invented all these weapons. And I think a stoma is one of the greatest things that humans have ever invented. And it's saved so many people's lives. But if there's any questions,
Dr. Schwartzberg, this is Brenda, your MC for tonight, and we've run out of time. Your demonstrations were so wonderful and colorful.
I tried to do as much as I could.
And I used to tease gastroenterologists, wondering if their mother sent them out to garden, and then they liked working with the hose, so that's why they became one. Now I might have to consider colorectal surgeons, with all those beautiful markers you have, as secretive artists below whatever else you're doing. So we want you to stay. Can you stay for a bit for some questions?
Of course.
We've run out of time to ask them right now because we're on a schedule, but we're going to listen to Bridget for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time for questions for everybody.
Absolutely.
I think one question that you should answer right away is if you're taking new patients. Someone wanted to know if you're taking new patients in your practice right now.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
So we try to see people the same day, the next day, that same week. We do as much as we can to try to help people, as quickly as we can.
Good. Well, this will give you some time to turn your camera around so we can see your beautiful face on when we come back for questions. And I'm going to move on to our next speaker that's coming in. And it's so exciting to learn the very basics of ostomies. And he said something so funny, which is, all we do is just cut right here. Well, that's all you do after 8 years of studying medicine. And that's right. That's all you do. So it's just kind of cute the way he said that. And another word I learned today was body habitus, big belly. Never heard that before, but I've experienced one quite a bit. So here we go. On to our last, but not least, speaker tonight. And then we'll have some more time for questions at the end. I would like you to know Bridget Dorsey. She's a pediatric clinical researcher at Primary Children's Hospital, and she's a medical student at the University of Utah. She was born with multiple birth defects and has had a permanent ostomy since she was 15 years old. She facilitates a virtual pediatric ostomy support group, and her broader goal is to create a safe and encouraging environment for people with disabilities and chronic illnesses to learn from and with each other. For this Ostomy Academy event, she will be discussing the logistical, social, and emotional aspects of going to school with an ostomy, from K-12 to college to doctoral training. She can speak from that for herself, and the tools that have helped her the most as a student. So let us welcome now Bridget Dorsey. Good to see you, Bridget. Hey.
Hi.
Well, you get a break from your studies for the next half hour or so.
I know.
Well, are you excited? Here you are with all these people just curious about what you have to say to them. And this is the very beginning of your ongoing correct me if I'm wrong. You're going to be a doctor, pediatrics, if you can. And so here's your first performance towards it, maybe. Not really a performance. Just share out everything you know in the next 20 minutes, will you? Thank you.
You got it.
Take it away.
Okay, and I have some slides that I think will be shared. Here we go. So this is me. I have an ostomy, like you heard. And what I want to do in the next 20 minutes is go over briefly some technical things about being in school with an ostomy, and then sort of share my own experiences along the way. So we can go to the next slide. I first just want to briefly talk about the difference between IEPs and 504 plans. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here to listen to what everybody else talked about. So if I repeat anything that anyone else talked about, I'm sorry for that, but also maybe you'll get a different perspective. So I think the most important thing to understand about IEPs and 504 plans is just that a few things. One, IEPs are specifically for K through 12 students. An IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. And then 504 plans can also be used in college. And sort of importantly, IEPs provide special education for specific students with qualifying disabilities. So it's a bit more restrictive. And then 504 plans are sort of holding the schools accountable to provide accommodations for kids with a wider variety of disabilities. And those plans are created with a little bit more flexibility, and they're more of a teamworky thing to try and keep kids in the classroom and make that accessible for them, make that learning environment more accessible. And whether you consider your ostomy to be a disability or whether you receive formal accommodations, that's a very personal decision and something to work through. But I definitely think it's worth understanding at least this jargon a little bit if you are in school or if you have a child with an ostomy in school, just to know when you hear these words what people are talking about. And then, and so just out of curiosity, since I'm not sure who all is here watching, I would love to know in the chat if you just want to pop in and say if you've used an IEP or if you've had a 504 plan or if your kids have, or if you've seen anything like this, just what your experiences are briefly, because I would just love to hear from those listening if they have these experiences, what those have been like, and we can talk about them. And no pressure to share if you're not wanting to, but that's just something that I think is helpful to learn from peers and not just one person with one experience. So, and I'll talk more later about some specific accommodations, but I think the ones that are most helpful to think about as far as new ostomies and young kids with ostomies is how to support that child when they need to change the bag and empty the bag. And that can look like having staff who's designated to help the child. That can look like having a designated bathroom that's a sort of special bathroom that they can use. That might look like just extra privileges to use different bathrooms or use bathrooms during a time that kids might normally need to ask to go to the bathroom, things like that. And then especially as kids get older, but also with younger kids, creating flexible attendance policies, flexible time for kids to be able to leave class and come back, things like that, that can be really helpful. And honestly, I still find helpful now, even in graduate training, because there is often even if there's not a required attendance policy, there's sort of expectations, and unless folks know why I might need to miss class for some reason, even if it's not going to hurt a grade or something like that, having people aware of the situation that can help advocate for me if a problem arises. That's sort of what that accommodation might look like in a less sort of stringent classroom setting, but still in an educational setting where I'm expected to be in a place at a certain time, even if that is on a hospital floor and working with patients rather than in a classroom. And then another area where accommodations can be helpful, and 504 plans can be helpful, is during exams, and especially if you have an ostomy that needs to be emptied a lot, making sure that you can leave during an exam and not have to explain yourself and go through things with that. And then sort of along those same lines, standardized testing is something that I used to have a lot of anxiety about, not because of the test itself, which I also had anxiety about, but because I was always worried about whether I would need to change my bag or empty my bag or have a leak or something like that during a standardized test like the SAT, ACT, and then the medical college admissions exam as I was getting closer to medical school. And the biggest thing with that I will say is that there are resources, and that those standardized testing systems, organizations, they have accommodation paperwork that you can use to work around that. So those things shouldn't be a problem. And my main point with accommodations is always just that when the ostomy becomes the biggest stressor in that setting, in the educational setting, that's when you know that you might need an accommodation for something. So for example, if the ostomy bag is the most stressful part of taking a test, that's how I knew that something needed to change so that I could have a little bit of extra time during the exam for when I need to empty my bag, things like that. Because I think tests are going to be stressful, but the most stressful thing about them should not be my ostomy bag. It should be the test itself. And then just sort of to form all of this, the biggest thing will be communicating with your teachers and administrators and folks that are in the schools specifically to help kids succeed. And that communication, having an open communication line, especially as a parent, if you're communicating with your students' administrators, being able to have a contact person and know that you can trust them with whatever you're dealing with in that time. I think that's super important. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have access to that. But as far as the sort of opportunity to build those relationships, I think the best way to get going in that direction is to reach out yourself and to take that initiative. And I know I, as a student, have had to do that a lot in college and grad school to be able to get what I need. And even though I had a lot of those things set up when I was younger, set up for me by my parents or by my mom, or set up by administrators, some of that follows me to college, and some of that has to be sought out by me. And those relationships with people that I trust are sought out by the student themselves, by me. So if anyone here is a student right now in college, then that will be the Can you see me? Oh, sorry. I think it just kicked me out, but I think I'm back in. Sorry about that. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about with this stuff is just sort of in school. I think the most helpful thing to do to sort of prevent problems is to have a plan for things like bag changes and making sure you always have extra clothes. And an accommodation that can be asked for is space to store those things. So that's something that I needed when I was in high school, just having a place that I could put extra clothes and bag supplies in a sort of administrative office. And so that's something that can be asked for as well. Okay. And then the next thing I want to talk about on the next slide is how to talk about the ostomy. And this sort of goes along with making those connections with the administrators and folks that might be able to help you. And this will be different. It will feel different for a parent to talk about this versus a student themselves to talk about this. But the main point that I want to make here is a few main points. One is that I think the most helpful tool for talking to other people is practice, and or sort of that's what I think is the most helpful way to improve those conversations, is to practice them beforehand. And this is something we do in medical school. This is how we learn how to talk to patients, is by practicing talking to each other in a way that uses the language that we want to use in conversations with patients. So I think this is a useful practice in any setting in life, no matter what you want to talk to somebody about that might be difficult. Taking some time beforehand to think about what exactly you want to say and what words you want to use, because it can be a lot less stressful to have this conversation when you have some keywords in your head that you want to use. So something that I like is that the United Ostomy Association has on their just main information page about what is an ostomy. They have a description that I think is really helpful. And I'm just going to read it to you because I use this wording when I talk about my ostomy sometimes. And I say, if somebody asks what ostomy surgery is, word for word from that description is, ostomy surgery is a life-saving procedure that allows bodily waste to pass through a surgically created stoma on the abdomen into a prosthetic known as a pouch or ostomy bag on the outside of the body. And I think, we all know that. We all read that and say, oh yeah, duh, that's what it is. But that language, I think the people who created that description are people who are experts in being able to communicate those things. Those descriptions take a lot of sort of like smoothing out to make sure that they're using the words that best communicate what an ostomy is and what ostomy surgery is. And so I find that using that well-polished language and practicing that is a helpful tool for being able to describe my ostomy to somebody else. And then I think the other big key thing I want to talk about here is that oftentimes I find it easier to give people time to respond. And that might mean that it's easier to text or email somebody about this than it is to talk to them in person. And I think that oftentimes we think, oh, if I'm having a difficult conversation, it'll be better to have it in person so that I can get it over with, or so that I can read their response quickly, things like that. But I think that these types of things that feel a little bit personal and you're worried about how somebody might respond, and I'm thinking about this more when you're talking to maybe your friends or people that you're nervous about talking about your ostomy with, that giving them a heads up and using this sort of well-polished language that you feel really describes what you want to say. If you can do that in a text or an email or some sort of format where they have time to respond emotionally or think through whatever they feel about it, or maybe they want to go online and Google and learn a little bit more so that they can respond appropriately. I think that's a really helpful thing. And if you're in a situation where you're talking to somebody in person, I think sometimes I've found that it's helpful to say, you don't have to know what to say right now in response to this, but I just wanted to let you know. And that kind of lets them off the hook to say the right thing and to feel that pressure of like, oh, I just got this information that I wasn't prepared to respond to. So I think those are my key points about how to talk to other people about the ostomy, and especially for young kids and people who aren't maybe as I don't know, good at responding in stressful situations or in situations where somebody shares something vulnerable, which is a skill that I think a lot of children have to, develop over time. So as a kid, it can be helpful to sort of use that practice of giving somebody time to think about what they want to say. And then on this next slide, I just want to talk briefly about gym class. And do you mind flipping to the next slide? I don't think I see it up yet. The next slide will show, yeah, this one. The question of sort of athletic participation, and I think a lot of kids ask this question right after surgery, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody already touched on this during this live stream, but I think having the opportunity, especially as a young person, to stay involved in the things that bond kids together, like playing sports and things like that. If that's an opportunity for a child, but the only thing that is making them not participate is their ostomy, then I think there are some ways to sort of overcome that. So first of all, I think there are some practical tools like wearing a stealth belt, which is a special type of belt that you can keep your ostomy sort of safe and contained by. There are little stoma domes that you can put over your stoma to sort of protect them from any kind of blunt force trauma that might happen playing contact sports, things like that. And then similarly, asking for accommodations in gym class, things like that, that can keep gym class an option for you, and really it should be accessible to all kids, but it really should be accessible pretty easily for kids with an ostomy to be able to participate in a way that's safe and feels good for them, but is not sort of excluding them from that. And then lastly, just if there are concerns about where they can change clothes in a more private place, and feel safe with changing their clothes and not having to maybe explain to other kids what the bag is, things like that. If this is a gym class scenario, that's something that an accommodation can be helpful for as well. And then on this next slide, I just want to talk about something that I think is really important for people of all ages, not just young people and students, but the idea that we all have advocates and that we can seek out advocates is really important to me. And I've had the privilege of sort of being handed a lot of really great advocates from birth, my mom, for one, and some really great friends growing up. So this picture here is one of my close friends growing up. She knew me since I was a little kid and spent a lot of time with me in the hospital when I was a kid. And you know, she was somebody who helped me really communicate with my other friends and communicate with people in sort of broader social settings about why I was sick all the time, or you know, whatever special situation I had. So I think having a friend and having somebody who you feel safe with and who can check in on you and help you navigate those settings, and just having one person in a social setting who you feel like you can trust, and who who understands you. I think that can be a huge game changer for going to school, especially as a kid. Um, and then this is my mom. She just has always been my biggest cheerleader, of course, by necessity, but also I think she really saw that I could do more than I could as a kid. Like, I think she could tell that, or she knew that that there was more for me out there if I could get through those years as a kid when I was really sick. And so in college, especially, she always really helped me find my own path and use the sort of unique wisdom of having an ostomy, and having gone through a lot of childhood disease. And so just finding these people who you feel safe with and can talk about what's going on emotionally and how you're feeling socially in your social settings and things like that. And sort of recognizing those people and being able to reflect on what's helpful and things that people can do to support you, especially in school. And then on the next slide, these are some more cheerleaders of mine. I love this picture with two of my biggest cheerleaders in medical school, because it reminds me that they have only ever known me with an ostomy, and they have never doubted my ability to succeed academically, and then provide really high quality care to others and to patients using that unique sort of wisdom and those experiences that come from what I went through as a kid and what I continue to deal with. And so I think just recognizing those cheerleaders and knowing who can help you and who can support you when you have a concern or a need to better access your education. So for me, these folks have helped me if I've needed to miss class due to, for example, recently a GI bleed, and how to get the accommodations that I need and how to access that effectively in this setting. And then just to sort of wrap it up, last slide, I just have a few last thoughts. I think the biggest thing that I struggled with as a kid in school was not as far as like having an ostomy and having GI problems as a kid. I think the biggest thing was not like, oh, where do I change my bag? How do I deal with all these things? What if it leaks? Blah, blah, blah. It was in fact just staying hydrated throughout the day. I think that was the hardest thing for me. So those of us who are here live, and if you're watching this now, take a quick sip of water. Stay hydrated. I think that's always my biggest plug to everybody all the time. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is that I think the hardest thing to deal with as somebody with a disability is, or any kind of chronic illness, is just day in and day out feeling like you are not making progress towards your goals, or like your illness or your disability is holding you back. And I think the biggest thing in school for me to manage that challenge of feeling like I was always getting sick and always missing things was just sort of knowing when to throw in the towel and call it a day and say, I can't do this day anymore. I got to go home and I'll try again tomorrow. And not trying to force myself to make it through a day and get sicker and feel worse. And I think that applies to work and to everything, is that sometimes you just need to know when to throw in the towel and try again tomorrow. And the last thing that I want to talk about really quickly is that I am a facilitator for a pediatric ostomy support group. I haven't been able to look at the comments to see what folks have said about potentially school and things like that, but I would love to see folks from here and folks from all over the place in my ostomy support group. It's the first Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and it's a pediatric group. So anyone under the age of 18, and then sometimes I have had a couple of folks who've turned 18 stick around. But just our main goal is to support each other and recognize our own unique strengths, and also be able to support each other through the suffering that can exist when we have chronic illnesses and disabilities. So I'm sure a lot of you folks are in ostomy support groups, but if any of you are kids or have kids with ostomies, that is a resource that I would love to share with anyone and everyone. And we meet on Zoom, and we'll continue to do so regardless of what happens with the pandemic. And the email address that you can contact if you're interested in that, I should have put it on the slide, but is
it's on there. It's on there already. So we've got it. Yep.
Oh, good.
We
Okay,
put
great.
it on there for you. So it's great.
Can...
Bridget, I want to thank you so much for your great presentation. I liked a couple quotes that you said. The ostomy should not be stressing them out. It should be the test itself. I thought that was a good point. And have a contact person you can trust. I think that's really important too. And think about what you want to say. Choose your words, and well-polished language goes a long way. So all those things were so important for us to hear. We are we are always running out of time, and the time flew by, I bet, for you to speak too. And it flew by as we listened to you. You're a very articulate speaker. If I had a child with an ostomy, I would definitely want you to be their doctor. And so I'm excited for you to finish your schooling and get out there in the real world. And can you stick around for some questions? I know you're on a
Yes.
busy schedule.
No,
So
I
that
am here.
we'll ask some questions now until about 6:28. Then we have our 6:27. We have, I mean, not six, just a few more minutes, and we'll wrap up with a mental health moment. But we've got a few minutes for questions for any of our panelists. Bridget did such a great job. We also had Dr. David and Anne Marie. So if you have more questions you want to add, please do so. I'm going to start with a question for Dr. David. I saw on there. Let's see, where'd it go? Oh, there's your face. What do you know? Okay, there's Dr. David's face. And I don't know if you could read the chat line, Dr. David. If your patient has an ileostomy hernia, what's a recommended belt for that?
I mean, I happen to like the Coloplast appliances, and I end up putting everyone in a convex light by them, and then I think that appliance has some, two little hooks that go along with their belt. And I think between the convex light, and I'm a big fan of those little circles, I call them, the moldable rings, and between the thin moldable ring and the convex light, and then the corresponding belt, I think that really gets a lot of people out of trouble.
Thank you. And also another question for you, Dr. David, is does the small bowel adapt and take on characteristics of a colon? If so, would there be bacteria found in colon now appearing in the small bowel? And what would be the adverse effect of that? How can you find out what kind of bacteria is there?
That is a really excellent question. And, related to that is J-pouch surgery, that the pouch is kind of taking the characteristic of the colon and the rectum together. And we do think it does change the bacterial content that's actually in the pouch. And sometimes that's beneficial, and sometimes it actually is not really compliant with the pouch. And we have to give sometimes antibiotics for pouchitis and chronic pouchitis. I'm a big believer that too many things are blamed on Crohn's disease of the pouch, where there's a mechanical problem such as a twist or an abscess that goes unrecognized, and the end result is pouchitis. And we can fix that rather than just writing the patient off of having Crohn's. But so essentially, the small bowel is always adapting. The minute you're done with surgery, it's going to try to do the right thing, which is maybe absorb more water. And it has an almost unbelievable capacity to do that. However, there are limits to that, and that's why we're, especially in Crohn's disease with repeat resections, we're always concerned about every possible technique to save someone even a centimeter of bowel, because each centimeter does count. Yes, the small bowel does actually absorb more water than even the colon does. But as you start to lose bowel and start to lose colon, the body can adapt, certainly. And the bacterial, they call it the microbiota, does change, but not to be too fancy. Yeah, it changes, and it can be good and it can be bad. Certainly, I think a probiotic, I usually just recommend yogurt, because I think probiotics can get very expensive. And I think those Jamie Lee Curtis yogurts are very helpful to keep things aligned.
That's great. Let's see. There was another question.
There was a question about traveling.
Yes, go ahead.
I can answer that one a little bit.
Thank you.
I think for me, the biggest thing about traveling has been just sort of letting go of my fear that, or just sort of like recognizing that I will have to empty my bag on the plane, and it will be what it will be, and that it's okay, and that that's just sort of part of the game that we have to play, having ostomy bags. And then I think something that can be helpful too, as far as going through security and things like that, is knowing that you can always request to have a private like security pat down or whatever if they choose to do that. So it'll depend on the type of machine that they scanner that they have in security, but when you're going through TSA, if you go through the scanner where you have to put your arms up and it swivels around you, that one will usually pick up the ostomy, and you just say, I have an ostomy, and they will have you pat it down, and then they'll just wipe your hands. But if all of that is too anxiety inducing, which I totally understand it could be, you can ask them to do a private thing to get through it. And Liz, that's a great point. Maria Jose is our total travel expert. She's a flight attendant, right? And the other thing I would say is that when you are going through, when you're going through security, I've been told to tell them before you even get there that you have an ostomy and all these things. But if you go through the scanner that is just sensing for metals, unless you have other metals, it won't detect the ostomy. And most of the time I can get through security without them even knowing. So I think there's something to be said for, if there's no problem, if it ain't a problem, don't try and fix it. So I try and only address it if it becomes an issue. But if that is too anxiety inducing, there are definitely ways to not have to deal with that whole stressful scene in the first place. So true.
What is I'm just curious for my own question, Dr. David Schwartzberg, what do you think is the thing that us patients need to know the most that sometimes we just don't know about ostomies? Just one major question.
I think if your doctor can't explain to you simply what's going on, then you need to get a second opinion.
Great.
Many people who are living with stomas that are permanent, and that's fine if someone needs a permanent stoma, but there's a lot of people who are living with permanent stomas that don't need to be permanent, but they've been told that, well, it's just how it is. And that, that a little bit breaks my heart, because I think people should be honest with each other. And that means, getting it. And I tell everyone to get a second.
Yes.
Along those lines, someone's trying to not allow someone to get a second opinion, and that something that's a red flag.
There are people online today that don't have great resources around them, and so I'm going to encourage you to please continue to look at the United Ostomy Association of America for your answers. And we have advocates on staff that have great connections. Not that they can individually advocate for you, but they can take you to some great information that might be helpful for you. It's just been amazing to see all the questions come through and to see other ostomates answering them, not even the experts here tonight answering the questions. So that's been fantastic. I want to just take a couple minutes with Molly Atwater's last mental health moment, and then I'll wrap up a special thank you to you. All right, so let's see. Molly Atwater is our United Ostomy Association's Director of the Young Ostomate Outreach and Chair of UOA's Young Ostomate Outreach Committee. She underwent ileostomy surgery in June of 2017 after more than 20 years of struggling with chronic constipation, a symptom of the genetic collagen disorder. As a member of the board, she advocates for ostomates age 18 to 50, and she speaks to support groups about ostomy challenges. Let's welcome Molly and see what she has to say in her mental health moment today.
As Brenda just said, I am Molly Atwater. I am the Director of Young Ostomy Outreach for UOAA, and I will be doing the mental health moment like I did last time for Ostomy Academy. So as part of today's mental health moment, let's just go back over some of the things that Dr. Schwartzberg and Bridget and Anne-Marie mentioned during their presentations. So if we go back to Dr. Schwartzberg, who was talking about the ABCs of ostomies, one of the important things that I like to remember is that ostomates have their ostomies for a reason, and that is to make our lives better. Granted, that may not always be the case. There are certainly days when ostomy life is hard and it's challenging and it's frustrating, but overall, our ostomies are lifesavers. And so to keep that in mind, whenever we're having those rougher days and we need to give ourselves the space to feel those negative emotions, it's helpful to have in the back of our heads that the reason that we have our ostomies is to improve our quality of life. That is not to say that we need to be gung-ho about our ostomies at all times. I find it extremely helpful to give yourself the space and the grace to feel all the emotions that you are feeling about your ostomy, the good ones and the not so good ones. By sharing them, it gives you the space and the freedom to feel those emotions and let them pass over you. So that's just a little bit on what I consider one of the ABCs of ostomies, is that acceptance piece. But talking a little bit about Bridget and Anne-Marie's sections about seeking accommodation. In all of my experience, I have found that the people who I've shared my ostomy story with are more than willing to help and more than willing to figure out what I need to set me up for success, whether that is in school with professors like Bridget was talking about, or classmates, or if it's in the workplace with HR or coworkers like Anne-Marie was talking about. Those people who you trust and who are looking out for you, my guess is more than likely they will want to assist in whatever ostomy struggles you are facing. So I would encourage you to reach out to that support system, and find the people in your corner who will help you in any of those more challenging ostomy days. Talking a little bit about just accommodations in general. Again, it's not something that you have to disclose. It is completely up to you. And if you're not really vocal about your ostomy, that's okay too. It does not negate anything from your ostomy experience if you don't really want to talk about it. But if you do feel comfortable talking about it and you do feel like shattering a little bit of that stigma, then more power to you. I congratulate you. So I guess that's it for me for this time's mental health moment. And I will see you guys next time.
Well, that was great. Thank you, Molly, for that. And I really want to thank all of our speakers tonight, and Dr. David Schwartzberg and Anne-Marie Finn and Bridget Dorsey. You all did so much to contribute to this discussion tonight. All the people that contributed in the chat line and how you helped each other is just amazing to me and wonderful. Want to thank 11 Health. They're currently working on several projects, so stay tuned to see what's happening with them. World Ostomy Day is coming up October 2nd. What are you doing? You don't have to go run a race if you don't feel like it, or a big bike ride, or gather $50,000 from your friends. You can just go on social media and just say, hey, it's World Ostomy today, and I have an ostomy if you want to. Look for mine. I'm going to do that. So our next Ostomy Academy will be in early December, and we look forward to seeing you there. We are grateful for you and all the things that you do for each other. And keep on keeping on. That's all we got to do. Well, that's a wrap. Or as we say, that's another one in the bag. Thanks, everybody.